Okay, so the digital health group, we had a very well attended session with a lot of people there, a lot of interest. It's obviously a hugely exciting area, and the challenge I gave to the group in the morning was to capture all this excitement, but bear in mind that we have to think of topics which could be useful to push through the IMI platform. So, and that's basically was our objective for today, was to feed, get areas where IMI can operate to make that change that Hugh spoke about last night, where we can make that change on actual healthcare practice. So to go through the highlights of the discussion, we had kind of presentations or discussions from various different angles. We kind of started with the state of the art, including some existing IMI projects, and we kind of spoke about where the technology can bring us. We had a panel on regulatory issues as well, which I think was very important and very revealing. And we finished it with the end user of all of this, the patient and the clinician. So we had people speaking from the patient viewpoint and from the clinician viewpoint. So the highlights of the discussion are, so the potential for digital health is obviously huge. It says here there's optimism. There's more than optimism. There's wild excitement about this, about where we can go. There's a huge number of initiatives out there already. The key challenge is how we can drive this through to the patient and what those barriers are and how we as IMI can help overcome those barriers. And one of the key points is that the technology is obviously moving a lot faster than the healthcare system's ability to deal with that, to deliver the innovation which they should be able to do. And of course, alongside this, the expectations of those end users, especially the patients, is growing, and therefore the healthcare system is challenged to really deliver on that potential. So one thing we discussed about is which patients use technology, and I think the conclusion of that was that while some people are very tech savvy and very able and willing to take technology on board, others are perhaps not in a position to do so, and we cannot forget them. So while we can engage with certain groups quite easily, we might have to work a little bit harder to engage with other groups, but it's definitely something that we have to address. The other thing was moving towards patients as consumers. As some of these things become more commoditized, we may move away from the physician-patient interaction so much, and patients become much more in charge of managing their own health, and they become much more kind of viewed in terms of consumer rather than patient. So one thing is clear is that there's a lot of technology already out there. And the challenge here is not so much developing new technology, although that is something which will be useful as well, but actually facilitating the existing technology to make it all the way through the healthcare process. And this was described as alignment of value chain, so everyone can see the value of them of doing their particular action. And by doing this, we can align existing technology, be it from an SME or a mid-sized or even a large company, and bring it all the way through the necessary steps to reach the patient. It's also clear that there are a lot of SMEs very active in this field, and this message we do hear in other fora as well, that they do find it difficult to enter IMI projects. So this is something that we are already working on, but we'll have to redouble our efforts. We had a presentation from our sister joint undertaking, Excel, which is just downstairs in our office. They focus on electronics, so microelectronics, and the presentation focused on the application of this to health. And it is key that, as I said, there's a lot of technology already existing, but where the technology can go as well. So I think we as IMI could benefit from a collaboration with them to really make sure that their technology does address the issues that we have. And of course, they would benefit from our input, and we would benefit from them. So it would be a mutually beneficial collaboration. I think that's something that I know Pierre is already discussing, so I think that's something we will move forward. And a lot of discussion came down to data, and I think the previous two presentations discussed data as well, especially real world data, that should say. Real world data, which is, as we know, very messy. It's difficult to kind of to guarantee the quality. There's different standards. Combine the data is very difficult. So this is a real challenge. One particular point came from the regulatory viewpoint is how do we know we can trust the data we get? So this is something that is very important to address as well. But kind of reassuring, there was this concept that came out of citizen science, and this came out through the discussion about having sufficient people qualified to deal with the data explosion which is going on. And the idea being that if you provide people access to data, they will use the data and explore it themselves. You do not necessarily have to impose a route for people to manipulate the data. If you provide data in obviously a controlled way, which meets all the ethics and privacy requirements, that data will be taken up and used. So to get down to concrete action points for IMI to take forward and specifically to feed into our strategic governance group, we had this concept of a medical roadmap. So this was kind of a concept which is kind of borrowed from other fields where they know where the technology is going, and therefore the companies involved in that can plan ahead. So at the moment, I think people who are developing technology don't really know what to do with it, and they don't really know where the technology will bring them. So if we can kind of do a plan, it doesn't necessarily have to be a hugely long-term plan. If we can do some sort of map about where the technology will go and allow people to plan ahead and find out where they fit in, that was something that was taken up. And maybe do a pilot, and a small-scale pilot would be something we could take on. There was also the concept of IMI as a validation platform. And this is essentially, you've developed a technology, you're maybe an SME or you're a small academic group or something with technology, but you need other people to kind of put that stamp of approval on this technology that it is actually useful. And this is not just regulator, but maybe perhaps the pharma companies could take on board a technology, put it through alongside a clinical study, for example, and validate that for a company and add true value. Okay, there's the take-home message about involving SMEs. So a couple of concrete actions were this concept of an SME marketplace, where we invite SMEs focused on maybe a particular disease area and with particular types of technologies, for example, new sensors. We invite them to come to us and tell us what they have and what they can do. And this will then feed into a topic development process where we can harness those best bits of technology and really run with them. We've also in the IMI previously discussed this accelerator model, which is a similar way. It's funding some innovative SMEs and then putting them through a validation platform. So that's something that we will have to revisit. One thing that came very powerfully, especially from our patient representative, is that any technology, I think this applies for everyone, not just this particular SGG, but anything, you have to focus on the usability. So ensure that whatever you developed is developed with the end users, for the end users, so that when it is produced, when it is released, it's actually something that they can benefit from. There's nothing worse than spending a lot of money developing something and then hoping people will take it up, but they don't. So this is something which is crucially important, and I think we in IMI are increasingly emphasizing the importance of involving patients and physicians and so on, the end users, in our projects to kind of guarantee this. One thing I think this came from the SME and more the industrial side was they need to have a bit more certainty about the questions around regulatory, HTA, and payers. There's a question of when does an app become a medical device, this type of thing. If it remains an app, that's okay. If it's a medical device, people get very nervous because they don't really know what to do with that, how to get it regulatory approved. So I think a forum where you can facilitate discussions and reassure people that there is a pathway there for them to get their things through the approval processes. I've already mentioned collaboration with other areas such as Excel. On the data front, so as I said, this was a very major point of discussion from basically all the different stakeholder groups we had. We need data. We need the data to be available for use, for reuse as much as possible. One concept is called FAIR. It's about making data findable so other researchers can easily locate it, accessible so that when they locate it, they can actually get it, interoperable so that they don't have to spend a fortune getting to work on their system. And this whole thing is kind of captured by the term reusable. So the data that is produced in an IMI project or elsewhere can be reused in other projects, not necessarily IMI, but elsewhere as well. And this, I think, applies especially to real-world data, which I think everyone recognizes the true value of this. There's a wealth of information out there. It's all siloed, to borrow the previous slide. A lot of it's still siloed, but if we can put that together, especially across multiple geographies, multiple data types, I think we can really get something really exciting out of it. And one of the barriers to this, I think, is to encourage people to data share. We have to find incentives that work for them, not necessarily monetary incentives, but why should people share their data? And I think this is one of the big barriers and something we should think of. And something else that came out as well, that if we do have access to all these data and a huge potential, we do need the people who know how to analyze it, how to bring it forward. So obviously this is a growing field still, but I think if we to reach the full potential of the data we hopefully will have access to, we do need those people. And this is something perhaps to feed back to our projects in terms of having some sort of education element to some of them. So hopefully I've captured everything, but I'd welcome any questions.
Thanks, Colin. There's a comment here? There's a microphone just there.
Chris Moder, Source Systems. Everything here sounds just great, but I don't see where is the patient. Maybe it's I lost something because it's great. It's data, it's system, regulatory, everything works perfectly. But where here is outcome for patient?
So I tried to capture that from my previous slide. It should be a deliverable as well. You're of course correct. Yes. So that is the entire purpose of what we're doing. So you're of course correct, and then,
Yeah, but what is outcome for patient from this system? This works perfectly. You got research, you got disease control, you got government, but what is for average patient like myself? I am diabetic patient. I don't see here improvement for me. Thank you. I might miss something, of course.
So the outcome, I think, was well voiced by the patient representative who spoke at the last session. It's about ensuring or improving quality of life for as long as possible, I think, and it's captured as simple as that. And these, hopefully, are all the enablers to make sure we can do that.
But how?
Are you okay? Lee?
I might have missed in your presentation, but as we move into the digital, of course, the size of the entity that can contribute very significantly shrinks. It could be one person writing a very useful app that could actually be contributing back. So how are we going to capture that amount of possibilities that will happen? And how actually to best intake and build into the larger structure?
So this is a challenge for us. A lot of the technology, as you say, can be developed in a single entity or even a single person. I think I haven't got into detail of this accelerator model which I've put on here, but this is trying to capture exactly that, which would be gather together a group of innovative SMEs, for example, in single project type funding rounds, so that we can allow them to develop their technology to a certain level, and then they would then be taken into a kind of a greater project, perhaps a validation model with the pharma companies and so on. So I think you're exactly correct. I mean, there's a lot of innovation out there based on single organizations, and we don't necessarily need the full collaborative model initially. But bear in mind, IMI is a collaborative platform, so we do have to have that at some stage. And I think to make sure the technology does go all the way through to the patient, that sort of collaborative model is necessary anyway.